Well, Chris's soapbox is good because I learn a lot from Chris's soapbox, so it's actually quite helpful.
We need another term for a soapbox. Like, where did the term soapbox
your scrub box
even come from?
You can be on your scrub box, okay?
Chris's scrub box.
Chris's scrub box.
You know, I've been working out more because it prevents me from being homicidal. It's also good for my rheumatoid arthritis. But I start my day working out, and I don't do jumps because white girl can't jump. But by God, if I could, I would jump on my scrub box. So this is my verbal workout.
Yes.
Every day.
You're going to climb onto your scrub box and preach to the world.
Yes.
What is true.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now, it's time to roll back and start the first case.
Welcome back to another brand new season of First Case. I'm your host, Melanie Perry, and I'm here with my co-host, Chris Blevins, and we are so excited to kick off season 17. This season, we are going to be doing a whole lot of myth busting, kind of like the guys on the TV show back in the day. We're going to take a firmly held belief or an idea. We're going to challenge it and discuss the reality and the evidence behind the correct practice. We've got several great guests lined up, but to kick off the season, Chris and I are going to tackle one ourselves, and we're going to be discussing the idea and the practice of covering back tables. Now, when I started in the OR, I was told that you cannot cover a back table for any reason. And while I don't hear that one as often anymore, there are still plenty of people who are either resistant to covering a back table or they don't understand how to cover it correctly and why there might be a situation in which it was necessary. So, since we are talking about covering back tables and this practice that primarily affects our surgical tech coworkers, I think there's really a big need for educating all of our staff on how to cover a back table, when to cover a back table, and maybe the times when maybe we shouldn't be covering a back table. So enter our very own educator, Chris Blevins, who is going to climb up on not her soapbox, but her scrub box and help us understand the reality of covering a back table when we can and when we can't. So Chris, thanks for just being an awesome co-host and letting me talk to you today and pick your brain so that we can actually cover this topic and address the truth about what we can and what we can do and how to do it correctly.
Thank you. This is my favorite episodes that we record. It's our therapy session.
It is. Yes. It's quite therapeutic.
Yeah.
Or just ranting session, but hey, whatever.
For real. Absolutely. And there's so many layers. Layers. Get it?
Yeah, right. Layers.
Bada bing.
Are they impervious?
Yeah, they better be. There we go. Yeah. No, let's back up. First of all, we need to get down to why did you need to cover the back table in the first place? This should be an exception to a rule, not the rule. Because if you are finding yourself covering a back table often, we need to talk about a process for your surgical services area. Because why did you have to do it in the first place?
Well, I think a lot of times when back tables are being covered consistently, it means you don't have enough staff, perhaps, and you're setting up rooms and covering them to send people off elsewhere, or you're covering them for convenience so you can set up early. And you're not supposed to set up a back table early just for convenience, are you?
No, but also who's doing the setting up? Because here's scrub box number one. A well-trained, certified surgical technologist is trained on efficiency of movement, is trained on what it is that you need in order to best prepare for that surgical procedure, is, the is the expert on asepsis and can set up for that procedure in a moment's notice, which is the best practice for that patient. So are you having the person that is best in place setting up for that case? Because if you are, that person will do it right before that patient is supposed to be rolling back in the room, which is the best, is the best care for that patient. So number one, why is it happening often if this is an issue at your facility? That's a process management, that's a people management, that's a leadership management. So like first check yourself there. Like if this is something that you're having to deal with often, why? If this isn't, and this is something that like, hey, we set up, we thought it was rolling back in this room, and we realize, nope, it's going to roll back in another, or, we have a lab that hasn't come back yet. Like, there are exceptions to that. Okay, great. Then, yeah, there's a delay in the case. Okay, here's my second scrub box. Why isn't it being observed by a human being that is sitting in that room watching? Because that's best practice. Best practice is that it should be observed, right? It should be an observed table that isn't, no one's like, oh, I set it up and then I'm going to leave the room.
You're right. If a case is opened, we've set up, and then something happens, really is best practice that somebody is monitoring the room to ensure that there are no breaks in sterile technique, there's no contamination, nothing happens. Now, there are some drapes that we've discussed on this podcast before that are clear, that you can set up for your back table. They are designed for covering, so that should you need to cover and leave the room, that table is covered, it's clear, and you can see what's up and you can confidently leave your room and come back. But everybody doesn't have those drapes.
Okay, so here's the scenario. Number one, are you doing this often?
Yeah.
Number two, if you're having to set up early or there's a delay, the best practice is having it observed. If that's not possible, then the third best option is we need to cover it.
Yeah, which means we can cover our back tables. We just have to do it correctly.
Absolutely.
Right. So then if that's the situation we're in, and if you look at both AST's position statement on sterile technique and setting up a sterile field, if you look at AORN's guidelines on sterile technique, both of them address this issue of covering back tables. And yes, it is something that we can do because there are situations where we're going to have to do it. But if you look at AORN, as I pulled up my book, the AORN guideline for sterile technique, section 7 in maintaining the sterile field, it says that opening instruments and sterile supplies as close as possible to the time of use is the primary strategy to reduce exposure to contamination. But when a sterile field is already open, covering the sterile field or portions of the sterile field can be performed. And they're talking about in situations where it's necessary. So there are times to do it, times it's necessary. So AORN and AST both give us guidelines and recommendations for covering if we have to. And there are times when we will. So let's kind of talk about that, Chris, but maybe a little bit more. There are times it's necessary. What are those examples of when it might be necessary to cover our back table?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, so, you read AORN's guideline. If somebody wants to look up AST's guideline, because there are a couple of differences, you can find AST's guideline on their webpage under patient position statements. And it's under established guidelines for establishing the sterile field. It's guideline 5. And it is number 4 under guideline 5. And where it talks about the research for covering a sterile field. And there is reasons for doing that, right? To reduce the potential for contamination. So why would you do that? If there was a delay in the start of the case, an unintentional delay, right? And I just mentioned it, right? Maybe a preoperative lab that you thought was coming back that's necessary for the procedure that was delayed and you haven't gotten those results back. That's a reason why. It's usually something surrounding the patient. or, surrounding the team that is going to be caring for the patient intraoperatively. Those are the two things I can think of most immediately. Another thing I can think of is when we've had maybe the same procedure that is going to happen multiple times in that room, and the first patient was canceled. We found out the patient was not NPO.
Yeah, they ate breakfast this morning.
But let's say, that one patient decided, NPO was not their thing. So guess what? That next patient they're just not ready just yet. So we can still use that same setup, those same supplies, but for the to follow case. So, those are just some examples why we wouldn't want to be wasteful with the supplies that we've already opened. We can still use them. There's just going to be a delay. Can you think
there's another? Else? Yeah, there's another time when covering your back table is also encouraged. And it's actually not covering the whole back table necessarily, but it could be if you are in a large setup and you have one back table for a certain part of the procedure and another back table for another part, and you want to cover the instruments that aren't going to be being used at the moment, and you want to keep them protected until that part of the case. Maybe it's the stuff for closing, maybe it's implants that you're covering, or also there is encouragement to cover the back table during times of increased traffic. Maybe when we are doing a big spine case and we're having to turn our patient from front to back, or we're doing a big flip, or even when we're bringing the patient in the room and there's a whole lot of setup. Some of those cases have an hour of setup before we ever get to actually the surgery. And so there is guidance there for also covering just to reduce possible contamination of the field. The air is all getting all spun around in the room while we're moving, and plus people are in the room. There's a lot of movement. It's just one of those things where it would probably be a good idea to cover it to protect those instruments until time for the case. But yeah, also patients cancel, things happen. And now we've got all these instruments open and we're going to waste it all when the same case is going to be coming in the room again. No, covering it is a really good idea, but we've covered it. We've covered this back table, and we will get to the how of covering in a minute. But when we have covered it, what do we do then? The table is covered, and a lot of times when it's covered so that the staff can leave the room, right? We cover it so that people can go maybe give a break, maybe take their own break. We can watch out for other people. But covering a table just for the sake of letting people do other stuff isn't really okay, right?
Yeah, it's not best practice. And at the end of the day, we need to not justify cutting corners for the sake of cutting corners. We need to be critically thinking through what are we doing all the time, because when you can justify doing one thing just this once and it becomes a habit, it's the patient that's going to suffer, but also it makes a culture where I call it a culture of excuses, and it's infectious. Because when you will cut a corner in one area, and as a leader, you are setting a poor example. So we have to make sure that we understand the why and that we communicate the why, what the exception is, so that the people who follow us understand that those are exceptions to the rules, that they aren't the rule. So, when we do talk about these things, we want to make sure that we understand this is the why. We're constantly saying that, but that we also understand that, yes, this is the why that we do this, but also there is a proper procedure for doing it, for removing it, and that in that procedure, you should not cut corners because you can contaminate. And the entire reason for covering your back table or your mail, whatever it is that you are covering, is to prevent contamination. And you don't want to screw that up in the midst of doing it.
Right. So what we've got here is an interesting, maybe even dichotomy. Maybe you could call it a dichotomy. Yes, you can cover your back table. And there are times when it is recommended based on the situation, or we would cover it because we are incredibly short-staffed in this moment and we need this staff person because we had a canceled case and we're waiting another hour. We've got to go get them to go give lunches and we have nobody else. And this is what we're going to do. On the flip side, if a table is open and we have the available staff, it would be better if we had somebody in the room at all times monitoring the table, monitoring the environment to ensure that there were no breaks in sterile technique. So we've got both, and we're holding them both in our hands kind of, loosely, maybe.
Right. Sure.
So, because it sounds confusing. Yes, you can do it, but maybe you shouldn't. But yes, you can. And that's not really it. It's understanding the whole scenario and the situation that we're in. Back tables should not be covered just for convenience, and they should not be covered consistently to make up for the fact that you don't have enough staff. But if you're going to cover them for any of the situations we've talked about or the reasons that we have, then there is a right way to do it. And there is a right way to take those covers off of the table. And that's really, I think, where we get in the biggest trouble. So, Educator Chris, how are you supposed to properly cover a back table?
So let's just talk about what's sterile on a back table. So the back table, and if you want to hear me go off about that again, you can look at our episode on gowning and gloving and why we do not glove off the back table, because only tabletop is sterile. So from edge to edge, right? But only the tabletop of a back table is sterile. So because it takes your bare hands to open the procedure packs in order to, to open those packs and fully drape a back table. Also, people that are opening supplies are in their surgical scrubs, and those are not sterile, right? So you have non-sterile. And so anytime that there is a non-sterile to sterile interaction, we want 12 inches, 1 foot distance between those things. So we only consider the tabletop of a back table to be sterile, which is why you turn and you have your inner gloves on prior to going to that back table, because your turn card is lower than tabletop. Okay, I'll get off of that. Yes.
That's another scrub box. We will move on.
Yes. So when you are applying a drape on top of the back table to cover it, to prevent contamination of the contents on top of your back table, which is the whole point of this episode, you cannot allow anything that is below tabletop to touch over the tabletop. Also, when applying that drape, your skin is not sterile. So remember, we don't cross the streams, right? Think about Ghostbusters. Don't cross the streams, right? So anything that is not sterile should never extend over something that is. So when you are applying a 3/4 drape, whatever it is, by the way, it should be impervious. So if you are putting something that is pervious, meaning that, air or moisture or dust or anything can come through it, then it's a moot point. Like, you're not preventing
that includes blue
contamination.
towels. You cannot say your mayo stand is covered because you put blue towels over it, and you can't cover your back table with blue towels.
No,
it has to be an impervious drape.
Yes, absolutely. So when you are putting something over it, right, you have to make sure that when you are putting that cover over it, that you are not extending from left to right. So you should be putting that drape from the middle and extending laterally over. And also, think about when we drape a patient. When we drape a patient, our sterilely gloved hands, we cuff it. So we make a motion and we cuff it. We kind of invert our gloved hand with the drape to protect it, so that when we move it and we hand it off to anesthesia to attach to the IV pole, we are protecting our sterile hand, right? So we do that same motion and we extend it laterally, right? Going from the midline laterally over the table, so that we are not taking and dragging that drape from one end of the table to the other. And what that does is protects the integrity of the tabletop.
Right. Yeah, you have two drapes with a gap that they're split in the middle, so that you can then part the Red Sea, so to speak, when you take them off, and one goes each direction.
Yeah. So you don't want to drag something and think of it like, I almost say like making the bed, right? So when you take your flat sheet and you're making the bed, we take it from the foot of the bed and we drag it all the way to the head of the bed. What you're doing is you're taking all of that lint and junk that was at your feet, and you are dragging it towards your pillow.
Oh, all your dead feet skin.
All your dead feet skin are going right up to where you're breathing.
That's disgusting.
Okay, well, it's the same thing. So if you were you don't want to take all of that gunk that is below tabletop and dragging it above all those sterile instruments and supplies, right? So that's why. So we have to, whatever motion you are doing to take that drape, that impervious drape, You don't want to drag anything that was below tabletop to the center, right? Or from one side of the table to the other.
And additionally, go ahead. Sorry.
Or your skin cells. So you have to protect and make sure that you're doing that as well. So a lot of people will I've seen them touch the inside of the drape with their hands, and they'll pull it over the tabletop and then they'll let it go. Well, that's great. So did your skin cells just touch the inside of that drape? And then where did that drape land? You have to think that through. And also I've watched people do it with just one person. Okay, well, how did you do that?
And that's what I've seen a lot of, and that I've had to address this issue quite a bit, and I feel like I'm winning in that at least we're using 2 3/4 sheets now instead of 1. Okay. So that's an improvement. But when those 3/4 sheets get pulled off, you need to be at the end of the table. It needs to be pulled towards you slowly. And as you pull it, you have to watch the tails of your drape, because if you just go over there and whip it off like you're pulling the red flag for the bull, run it through, all of those edges flip back up, and suddenly your edge has come back up onto the table. You're making this big pull, and then everything drags across your drapes, and you've contaminated your back table. And so thinking about that process.
Yeah. All of the air and the dust and the particles, that you're trying to protect from. Here you go, like Toro,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've stirred them all up, and now right. Wait a second, slow pull, controlled pull. And now, if you are using a drape that is designed to cover the back table, those drapes typically have handles on both sides. It's designed for 2 people to use. You grab the handles, you pull together, it splits, and pull it slowly. Once again, we're not a matador. We're not draping it out of the way of the bull. It needs to be pulled slowly so that those edges don't fold back up. We don't make this big gust of air. We don't disturb particles, all of those things. So thinking about the process from beginning to end, covering our back tables for the right reason when we need to, but then when we go to uncover those tables, because that's where a lot of the idea that you can't cover your back table comes from, is because people know that that's a great source of contamination, is people not uncovering them correctly. And so they just say, don't cover it, because that's easier than trying to get people to cover it correctly. And now we have to think through how to uncover it in a way to maintain the sterility, to protect the sterile field, and to uncover it so that we can continue to use our instruments because we didn't contaminate. And I think that's understanding the whole picture, the whole process.
Here's my favorite that I've seen too, is they'll use 1 3/4 sheet or a back table cover, right? So it's impervious. I think they've done it right. They've opened it from the middle, extended out, so they didn't drag it from the foot of the bed. But, and so I've seen them, yay, they've given themselves kudos for that. And then here's my favorite. The nurse will take their bandage scissors that are connected to the lanyard.
To her dirty belt.
Or to their dirty belt. And then she'll yank them up, and then she'll cut a hole in the middle of the drape and then rip it. Okay, great. Tell me what was underneath that hole, right? Yeah, super
that
fun.
One hurts me. Okay, so here's the other one I've seen. And this one I can actually... Yeah, okay, so that one terrifies me because you pull the drape up, you take your dirty scissors, you cut into it. Now you've introduced your dirty scissors on top of your sterile instruments.
In the middle of my back.
In the freaking middle of my back table. And now we're just going to rip it and pull it over.
And pull it open. And you're like, ta-da!
No.
See? I was... No.
And the other one I've seen, at least, this is not as scary as that one. And I can actually understand the logic behind it. It just does not comply with best practice of using 2 drapes. They will take 1 drape and they open it up and they leave 1 edge still on the top of the back table cuffed, so that when they go to remove it, they reach that 1 edge and they pull from that end all the way over and pull it back, almost like you're pulling the covers down off the bed, but that end of the drape never went over the back table. And I can see the logic. Okay, it never hung over. It's there. I'm going to pull it back. The problem is they don't pull it slowly back and they rip it off. And now suddenly we've got tails flying. And I think it's just a lot bigger space to risk contaminating something as you pull that drape off. And also, both of the guidelines for AST and for AORN both recommend using 2 drapes just to prevent possible contamination. So we should be using 2 drapes just to follow best practice. But I can at least see with using 1 drape, if you don't have that one end hanging all the way over the table and it's just there at the end on top where you can pull it. If you pulled it correctly, I can see that working. But the guidelines the guidelines do all say use 2 drapes. So for best practice, we should all be using 2 3/4 sheets or a drape designed for covering a back table.
Covering, yeah. It's once again, it's like murky waters. And why, like, at what point are murky waters okay? Like,
yeah, when do you want to go swimming in that? Like, yeah.
Right. Like, and if it's not a trauma situation, like, and this is coming from the trauma scrub. This is coming from the trauma scrub but also like knowing we call lots of things trauma that aren't trauma. Like, no,
you don't say.
Hurry up and wait. Oh God, they're coming in. Yeah, really? But they're still in the ER. Yeah. But we don't have time for a timeout. But we don't have time for a count. So I don't know. At the end of the day, I think sometimes we make excuses for cutting corners when, come on, guys. Like, but do we?
Really? Yeah. I mean, we had the emergency add-on that couldn't go until the doc went home and had dinner one night, and then he came back. So tell me that's an emergency add-on. I mean, come on. Not calling any names on that one, but geez.
Tell me it's emergency without. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So as we devolve into all of the crazy things we've seen, we do need to recap, because this is one of those conversations that just kind of goes back and forth. I feel like you can do this, but you shouldn't do this. You should do it this way, but this might work, all of those things. And when we think about it, understanding sterile technique, understanding how to maintain our sterile field, and understanding what we are doing and how it could impact it will actually influence a lot of our practice and help us understand this, So something can happen. Sometimes we have to cover a back table, and it is perfectly okay to cover your back table as long as you cover it correctly. Ideally, if there's a room that's going to be sitting open for a while, someone should be in the room monitoring it. And if that can't happen, not just because of convenience, but if for some reason that can't happen and you do need to cover your back table, then remember to do it in a way that is most likely to prevent contamination when you go back to uncover your back table. So that is my small synopsis of this conversation. Chris, what else do you want to add before we close this conversation?
No, I think it's great. At the end of the day, we have to check ourselves and stop being reactive and be responsive. And just why, is there a reason why we're doing this, or are we doing it just because we've always done it? We always want to just check our practices, check our processes, and make sure that we're, at the end of the day, doing best practice really isn't that hard. And so, there's a reason why there's research behind it. Treat every patient the way you would want your loved family members to be treated, the way you would want to be treated, because an excuse isn't good enough. So, there's going to be a time, but if there is a time for us to do these things, let's make sure that we are doing them correctly and just thinking it through.
Yeah. So if somebody wants to go and look this up further so that they can get more information, can you tell us again what the name of the AST position statement is for them to look up?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really big one. When you go to AST.org, you go down to their patient position statements, or I think it just says position statements. It'll lead you to kind of a pop-out window, and you can go to guidelines for establishing a sterile field. And there's lots of really good resources in that one. But I believe if you go to the Roman numeral 5 and then number 4, it specifically talks about the research behind that. And just like with AORN, scroll all the way down, it'll show you the research behind it. But yeah, and there are some little, there are nuances between AORN and AST, but at the end of the day, they both say, yes, this is, acceptable practice in certain situations. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do it.
Exactly. And speaking of AORN, once again, that's in the AORN guideline for sterile technique. If you look at section 7, maintaining the sterile field, they have a whole breakdown. And then later on the page, just for the 2025 guidelines, it's page 1023, there is a lovely diagram that actually gives you the picture of what it is we've been talking about. Since this is audio and you can't really see all the hand movements we've been making, there is a picture in the AORN guidelines to kind of give you that mental image of what it is we've been talking about to help you place that. But these are valuable resources for you. The evidence is there. The work has been done to provide us with the best practice from AST, from AORN, so that you can practice confidently and know that what you're doing is correct. So as we bring this conversation to a close and we are looking forward to this season, come along with us. We are going to be tackling several myths and ideas that we believe or practices that we have that might not be exactly right, things we've been taught that maybe we need to change what we believe. And really, it's just to make it better for all of us so that we are practicing best practice and we are doing the right thing and the best thing for our patient. So on behalf of Chris and myself, thank you so much for joining us for this first episode of season 17. So on behalf of Chris, myself, and our whole team, thanks for joining us for this season premiere of season 17 on First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.